Good morning to you all. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 74 of the House of Commons Standing Committee of Canadian Heritage. I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
Fact is being run under the hybrid format in keeping with the order of the House of Commons that was adopted on and the 23rd of June 2022. I just also wanted to give you a couple of housekeeping notes. I wanted, again, to welcome everybody and say that while public health authorities and the Board of Internal Economy no longer requires that you wear a mask if you are in the room, masks and respirators are still excellent tools to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and other respiratory diseases, and their use is encouraged. Now, I want to take this opportunity to tell all participants that you are not allowed to take screenshots or photos of your screen during this meeting. The proceedings will be made available on the public website so that you can get anything you want there. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September the 20th, 2022, this committee is meeting to continue its study on safe sport in Canada. Just a couple of things. For those of you on virtual, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little round globe, and if you press it, it'll give you English or French or original as you need. Just remember to mute when you're not speaking, and all questions and comments should be addressed through the chair. So please don't speak unless I call your name. Thank you very much. And so we will begin. Today we have, again, our study of safe sport in Canada. And this is Kate Bain, Managing Director of Charity Intelligence Canada, the Coaching Association of Canada. I don't know if Ms. Lafreniere is here, Lorraine Lafreniere, who's the CEO. Thank you. She's obviously in the room. And then we have the Sport Information Resource Center with Deborah Gaswitz, President and Chief Executive Officer. And I want to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to come and bear witness to us about some of the questions that you're going to get. So I shall begin. Every person who is appearing here as part of a group or the individuals have 5 minutes to speak. And what I will do is I will give you a 30-second shout out, and I mean shout out. I'll say 30 seconds. So just ignore me. Just remember that it means you only have 30 seconds and then we'll have to cut you off. So thank you very much. And I will begin with Ms. Bain. 5 minutes, please. Please unmute, Ms. Bain. You are muted. Oh. Yeah, thank you. Now,
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to say quickly to the committee, thank you so much for your conduct. We've all watched, and it has been so refreshing to see a really thorough investigation of what happened at Hockey Canada. My name is Kate Bain. I'm the Managing Director at Charity Intelligence. Charity Intelligence researches Canadian charities, and we post research reports on our website so Canadians can be informed about their giving. I have not analyzed or reviewed or rated Hockey Canada. My work on this file was purely to help journalists walk through and understand the audited financial statements. I've been invited to report to you on financial transparency of Canada's sports organizations, the RCAAs, and charities. Now, the RCAAs are amateur athletic associations, small subset of Canada's registered charities. They can issue donation receipts. Yet this small group of 138 amateur athletic charities are not required to complete an annual return called the T3010. Every other Canadian charity must complete this annual return. The T3010 discloses basic information about a charity, including staff, compensation, programs, and finances. This loophole must be closed. RCAAs must file an annual T3010 just like every other registered charity in Canada. Another area where financial transparency can be improved. Last May, when the news about the Hockey Canada legal settlement broke, Canadians had many questions, and we were unable to answer these questions. Hockey Canada was not financially transparent, its books were closed, and it was not public, and its finances were not publicly available. The information is available if one goes to the bother and cost and delay of filing an access to information request. Mark Blumberg filed this request, but the pages he received were incomplete. It took 3 months until August 2022 for us to receive Hockey Canada's complete audited financial statements. Hockey Canada did become financially transparent in December 2022 when it posted the PDFs of its audited financial statements. The lack of financial transparency among Canadian charities is far more common than Canadians expect. In 2007, when we asked charities for audited financial statements, 28% refused. In 2022, 13% refused. This lack of financial transparency is out of step with the public's expectations. 92% of Canadians say that charities should be financially transparent. And whether it's 2007 or 2023, Canadians are always shocked to learn that charities are not required to be financially transparent. Should Canadian charities have the right to refuse to be financially transparent? This option is only available in Canada. In the US, the UK, and Australia, financial transparency is regulated. In those countries, the audited financial statements are posted on the charity regulator's website and are easily available with just a click. It's time Canada got in step and did the same. While aligned with what Canadians want, there could be strong opposition from the minority of charities that fiercely keep their books closed. These charities include some of Canada's largest charities that receive hundreds of millions of dollars in annual donations. We track $750 million in annual donations going to what we call these dark pools or black hole charities. Thomas Cromwell found this attitude at Hockey Canada. I quote from his report. Hockey Canada expressed that some other changes were just not well suited for their organization, such as making the financial statements available to the public. Although Hockey Canada had achieved considerable financial success over the years, Hockey Canada is concerned that being seen as an organization with deep pockets could create some negative implications. For example, financial transparency could have an effect on their bargaining power with respects to the settlements of lawsuits. And this could also influence the amount of money that sponsors would be willing to offer in the future. This is not to mention the fact that the media could use the information to depict a negative image of the organization. Hockey Canada's attitude is common among the non-transparent minority of charities. These charities see their activities as nobody else's business. I ask for your committee, for your leadership to make Canadian charities financially transparent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bain. And now I would go to Coaching Association of Canada, Lorraine Lafreniere. Ms. Freniere, please, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too would like to acknowledge the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples on which we find ourselves.
I would like to highlight the courage of the victims and survivors who broke the silence.
Canada, CAC, was called as a witness on December 1st, 2022 to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. CAC's witness statement, as well as a brief which were submitted, is available. Our position remains that an inquiry is needed. As Minister Saint-Onge confirmed, it is a matter of when and how. An inquiry will only be successful if it is built on the collaboration of all partners in the sport system, as well as those who contribute and partner in sport. An example is our work with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, who guide us with their expertise. We need insight and understanding from each jurisdiction, that of the provinces, the territories, the federal government, the national sport federations, and the provincial territorial sport federations. How can we better address the governance issues across the system? How can we better identify leading practice and fast-track improvement across the country? Permit me to share the interdependence of CAC and coach training education across the country. Le mandat de
The mandate of the Coaching Association of Canada is to ethically guide the development of coaches and sport practitioners and to implement and promote a development program in association with federal, provincial, and territorial governments and national, provincial, territorial sports organizations, clubs. This represents the entire sport system.
Sport and recreation are critical to Canada's post-COVID recovery. Research is clear. Evidence has shown that between 40 and 48% of children and adolescents experienced mental health issues during the pandemic, and those who did not have access to sport and recreation were worse. We are really trying to urgently address this issue with the support of the Public Health Agency of Canada by improving mental health literacy in our coaches, our participants, and our athletes. The good news is sport is on the rise. The most recent Canadian Tire Jumpstart Status of Sport report points out that while 70% of parents agree organized sports offer great experience for children, 44% say they cannot afford registration. Additionally, 81% of sport organizations surveyed said the cost to run youth programming has risen. The message is simple. Sport is important, but everybody is struggling under the weight of costs. This exposes a threat to safe sport. This exposes a threat to safe sport as well-intentioned individuals and organizations cut corners to offer sport. The experiences and dynamics in grassroots sport must be included as part of the inquiry so we can acknowledge and proactively address the challenges facing our athletes as they progress through their journey, our coaches as well. And finally, our priority at CAC is to continue to focus on prevention in partnership with Sport Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Status of Women Canada, to find ways to address safe sport by currently working to standardize screening processes and enhance training for coaches in an athlete-centered holistic development approach. Merci, Madame Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lafreniere. And now I go to our last witness for the Centre de Documentation pour le Sport. And
Sports Information Resource Center.
5 minutes, please.
Excellent, and thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the Heritage Standing Committee on Safe Sport for inviting me to speak today on behalf of the Sport Information Resource Center, or as we'll refer to as CIRC. To the survivors in sport who have come forward and shared their experiences, and for those who have not, my heart goes to each and every one, as no one should have to go through the abuses and harms you've suffered. As a parent, as a volunteer, and today as someone working in sport, I firmly believe that we need to do whatever we can to ensure no one, especially children, are maltreated or harmed in any way. My reason for coming here today is because I believe we can make a difference. Why? Because I'm watching behaviors change. CIRC is Canada's leader and most trusted partner in advancing sport through knowledge and evidence. Our role is to help answer questions, facilitate conversations, and share knowledge with the sports sector. We're not an advocacy group, we're a resource center and known for our neutrality and our desire to help find credible information and to listen and to learn. For example, 10 years ago, concussions were not well known in the public conversation. Athletes, coaches, officials, parents, and sport media all seem to embrace tough it up, shake it off mentality. But in 2016, the government, led by Governor General David Johnston, decided we can do better. The FPT ministers made it a priority to increase concussion awareness, learn how to manage and prevent concussions in sport, and collect the data to continue learning. Today, all national sport organizations have mandatory concussion policies. The provinces have implemented concussion protocols. Ontario has Rowan's Law Day, and the FPT endorsed the 4th week of September to be Concussion Awareness Week every year. Maltreatment in sport is a serious problem, as evidenced by the revelations of horrendous harms experienced by athletes. We recognize that safe sport is a priority for Canadians, as it was highlighted in 14 of the 24 Canadian sport policy consultations last year, but we're also witnessing behavior change as it relates to safe sport. From the Red Deer Declaration endorsed by the FPT in 2019 to the creation and mandatory adoption of the UCCMS and OSIC by national sport organizations this year, change is happening. In an effort to be proactive, NSOs, PSOs, and universities are now creating dedicated staffing positions to help focus on safe sport. CIRC hosts Canada's National Sport Job Board, and this past year, we've noticed an emergence of postings for sport safety coordinators, sport safety officers, safe sport managers, directors of safe sport, as well as managers of HR and equity, diversity, inclusion, and recently one for EDI and anti-racism coordinator. We have observed an increase in education and awareness surrounding safe sport. CAC, Respect in Sport online modules, the Sport Research Conference with an Inclusion and Diversity panel, Soccer Ontario Summit with a Safe Sport panel, circuit articles highlighting recent research. Sports are collaborating and offering training in ways that are relevant to their members, their staff, and their boards. And we're seeing an increase in safe sport and safeguarding related research. The findings of our recent literature review of over 30 studies echoes what we heard from the more than 5,000 Canadians who participated in the Canadian Sport Policy renewal process in 2022. Programming needs to be more than developmentally and technically sound. It needs to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. Calls for mandatory safe sport, anti-racism, and cultural awareness training for everyone in sport, participants, parents, coaches, officials, administrators, and leaders, were loud and clear. While safe sport environments are necessary for everyone in sport, athletes and officials were identified as the people most often experiencing abuse and harassment. In particular, the issue of abuse of officials is under-recognized and contributing to a larger problem of official availability. And we can't run sport without officials. As mentioned in a campaign currently run by several PSOs in Manitoba and Ontario, no ref, no game. The Canadian Sport Policy consultations indicated a clear desire to see Canada as an international leader in safe sport. So what can government do? We need to start by listening to Canadians, especially our survivors. We need to collaborate and make safe sport a government priority.
30 seconds.
And we need to fund and encourage sustainable programming that promotes safe sport at all levels of sport. Thank you for listening. We want to help.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaswitz. And now I'm going to go to the part of the meeting that is a question and answer period. Now, the first round is going to be 6 minutes. 6 minutes means questions and answers. So please, everyone, try to be as concise as you can. We will begin now with the Conservatives, and I do not have a list for the Conservative speakers, so
it will be Mrs.
I have no
Thomas.
idea who begins. Pardon?
It will be Mrs. Thomas.
Yes, Mrs. Thomas, 6 minutes, please.
Perfect, thank you. To all the witnesses, I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. I have a question for, my first question will go to Ms. Gaswitz. Ms. Gaswitz, I'm curious if you've ever received government funding.
Yes, we do.
And what does that look like?
So our funding, we get funding from Sport Canada for a lot of programs. We also recently received funding with Health Canada on the Air Quality Health Index, some provincial funding that was helping us with Enable to make job postings more accessible. So different types of government funding.
Ms. Gaswitz, the funding that comes from Sport Canada, what is that used for?
So we use it for, several different projects. Some is for that core funding, which is for communication. So it's allowing the sports sector across the board be able to share their announcements, share what's going on, share what jobs are available. So there's that central vehicle, but it's also used to share educational programs and resources and new learnings. So there's a quarterly newsletter that shares a lot of research that is synthesized, shared out with the sector. There's daily news that goes out. There's social media that goes out. But we also have funding for dedicated programs, such as for concussion. So obviously trying to encourage host venues that bring people from across the country together digitally so that, all 13 provinces and territories can hear about it. We also have research conferences, so different projects that we're trying to help get the message across.
Thank you. The same question to you, Ms. Lafreniere.
Yeah, we receive government funding from Sport Canada. We, as an organization, are actually mandated by the federal, provincial, territorial governments. So the ministers responsible for sport endorse our mandate in coaching education to train coaches from community to high performance across 66 sports in every province and territory. So annually, we receive $4 million base funding from Sport Canada, and then we use that for coach education and training and building curriculum, our safe sport programs across the board.
What are the accountability mechanisms put in place in terms of how that funding is used?
The accountability mechanisms, are an annual report to the Government of Canada on our performance. We publish an annual report every year posting where we've had our success and failures. We report to our board of directors as well.
Thank you. And also to you, Ms. Gaswitz, what are the accountability mechanisms put in place between you and Sport Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to provide reports regularly on every one of the different programs. So there is the regular reporting that goes in. We have our annual report. When we're doing the special projects, we're accounting and working with Sport Canada throughout the process as well to make sure that it's completely transparent. So yeah, several different ways of making sure there's continued accountability.
I'm going to give the mic over to Mr. Kevin Waugh.
Okay, thank you. I'll continue with Ms. Lafreniere. Your NCCP training and workshops, I've taken one, they're good. The background checks that your organizations in Canada, that is the biggest thing. So can you talk about the background checks? We have seen a number of coaches over the years slip through, and maybe just talk about the background checks, as we're all looking for volunteers to become coaches.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not uniform across the country, which is a challenge. And in different jurisdictions, there are costs associated with it, which is why I brought that point forward earlier about the costs of running safe sport, of quality sport delivery. So we support the Canadian Olympic Committee, we support the Canadian Paralympic Committee, and we support Commonwealth Games Canada in doing screening of coaches who go to Olympics, Paralympics, Pan Am, and Commonwealth Games. That partnership exists, but currently right now, national sport federations adopt their own approach at screening coaches, which is one element of prevention that sets the appropriate stage for safety.
That has to change in this country. How do we change it?
Well, we're currently trying to work with Sport Canada to access funding so we could actually build a model of screening across national sport federations. And we hope with our partnership with the provincial territorial governments, because of our mandate, that we're able to support uniform implementation of screening across the country that is understood at the door of the clubhouse.
Yeah, that's the problem in this country. You have provincial bodies, and then you have, the lower end of it, let's say the starting sports, who really don't adhere to many of the provincial programs because they're just starting out, like soccer, like gymnastics, and others. So comment on that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely. It's a challenge, and when you look at the sports sector in general, the rotation of staff through sport in some instances that is an entry-level position, it's not uniform. And so we need to address that and codify, document exactly the process and ensure it's adhered to.
Will OSIC help or not?
We have 10 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. OSIC can contribute to policies. It's early stages.
Thank you. And now I go to the Liberals. Tim Lewis. Tim, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here for this important study as we move forward. Perhaps I will start online with Ms. Gasowitz. What are the challenges of having national sports organizations, provincial sports organizations, territorial sports organizations to set those standards for safe sports? We've heard in subsequent or in previous testimony that there's concerns of being minimum standards, sort of ticking a box. As long as an organization has to tick a box, that's good enough. Can you start with what the baseline standards you'd like to see for sports organizations, provincially, nationally, territorially, and then expand on what you'd like to see?
Yeah, thank you very much. And you identified one of those big challenges that as a country as large as ours, with as many sports as we have, you know, at the national, the provincial, territorial, and community level, there are a lot of challenges in alignment is one of those words of trying to get, once you've got a policy, it consistently making it through the system and across the country and to the different sports. And I think that becomes one of those biggest pieces. When it comes to communication, people and organizations receive information differently, and there's different players. And so you need to have some of those consistent baselines, which is what you referred to. Having a consistent policy is that first step, that at least everyone has what are the rules, what is the policy that goes in place. And those basic rules and those policies should be across the board. From there, it works to the education. It's no good having a policy that just sits on a shelf. It needs to be shared with all the members, all the people within any of the organizations and across all of them. And then it needs to be evaluated and continued, and, you know, I mean, that reinforcement. So I think if you're looking at those different stages, you have to have that baseline that we've all got as a minimum standard. Then we need to really focus on communication, and it needs to be relevant to that sport, that region, whether it's our territories or BC or anywhere. For athletes, for parents, for board members, it's different types of communication. Communication is critical to keep that messaging consistent, so it's repeated over and over again. And hearing it once is not enough. It's got to come different ways so it makes sense. And then it has to be evaluated. Is it working? This is a whole dynamic process. What's working, what's not? Take the learnings and then reapply it. And I think those are so key.
I think that was very, very thorough. A consistent policy, education, evaluation, and then communication as well. All of that would require data monitoring. So how can we make sure that we have the data? It's out there. How can we make sure that we get that data and allow those steps to happen?
You're right, and that is such a critical opportunity. I would equally, refer to it as we are getting a lot of data, but that is an opportunity going forward to make sure that we've got consistent data collection, working with our researchers, but also working with that consistent, being mindful, because it's very time consuming to try to capture it, how to collect it. But you can set that consistent way of data collection, making sure that it's open for people to be able to study, making sure that people can report back, that the lessons can be shared. So I think working with our research community, working with all the sports, and consistency in how to collect, being mindful of timing is just so important, especially for going forward. 10 years forward, as we're trying to learn and evaluate, but make it easy so that we can capture the data and we can learn from it.
Thank you. I want to I'll address to Ms. Lafreniere. I appreciate you being here. In my riding in Kitchener-Conestoga, we've got the Women's Girls Hockey Association U15B team, the Wolverines, which is led by all women's coaches. One of the Wolverines coaches said she had a female coach in her last years in minor hockey, and that gave her the confidence that she could be a coach herself. And now she's sharing her talents, her values, everything she's learned, the experience, and coaching these young women. Players described the experience as comfortable and fun. And in a study as serious as this is, to hear those words, that's sort of inspiring. They see the women coaches leading, and I know that's making a positive difference probably in their sports and in their lives as well. It's that if you can see it, you can be it mentality. So as far as training, as far as certification, as far as leadership groups, what exists and what can we do to expand on stories like this about diversity and having more women as coaches?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. We need that storytelling to happen across the country to get more women and girls engaged in leadership. We know that in the National Coaching Certification Program, it hovers around 65-35 male accessing the training and intervention. And we also know from data at Olympics and Paralympics how dramatically reduced it is for women in coaching positions. So we try earnestly to work on in these areas. Diversity in coaching is so important, and it's the broad spectrum of diversity. So we have a partnership with the Black Canadian Coaches Association to offer apprenticeship programs. We have a partnership with the Aboriginal Sports Circle where we support their apprenticeship programs at Canada Games. We have a Women's Canada Games apprenticeship program where we benefit from great success at those events. And so it really does, it really is about the priority of the system to storytell, but to offer positive opportunities for safe sport. And diversity is the key to safe sport.
Thank you, Ms. Lafreniere. I think, Tim, your time is up. I now go to the Bloc Québécois, and I hope it's Mr. Lemire. Is it, Sébastien?
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. I want to start with Ms. Bain. In terms of transparency and accountability, do you believe Hockey Canada has changed its culture?
Do we have a problem with the sound?
Sorry, my apologies.
Oh, sorry,
Madam
Ms.
Chair.
Bain. Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you. It changed in December 2022 when it posted its audited financial statements. But, I mean, after all the investigation, after all the pressure, that was not a willing decision. It took a new management team. That kind of attitude is persuasive at that minority of charities and sports organizations that see their finances as their own business. It's nobody else's business, and do not recognize themselves as being public charities.
In this committee's work, we'd already questioned Hockey Canada and the representatives from the 3 hockey leagues to understand the links between the different businesses. We asked for contracts. We only got one. In fact, for the clerk, I think it would be wise to contact these organizations to understand the contracts that tie together the leagues. In the contracts, there are things that we were not able to see. For example, secret funds that were used to perhaps settle sexual assault complaints. We don't see enough of the follow-up for agreements. We've seen championships, for example, the scandal at the junior league level, but there was nothing in the minutes on expenses and revenues, nor on profit sharing. We're not under the impression that we're managing to follow the money that was provided for by the federal government. Until recently, the documents were not even filed with the federal registry. We don't know that much has changed since the minister actually revived the funding of Hockey Canada. Do you think her decision was the right decision at the right time?
Madam Chair, everything you say there, sir, is exactly correct. There is such a culture of not being transparent, and all of these sports organizations that are large need to be financially transparent. All of their assets, all of their dealings, all of their related party transactions need to be provided. Just listening today to the work that's being done in safe sport, it's difficult to reconcile whatever the Sports Canada funding is for Hockey Canada with the immense needs of other organizations to do safe sports. If this is a government priority, Hockey Canada doesn't need the money. It's got $98 million in the bank. It's the most, as it said itself, we have deep pockets. It has millions and millions of dollars, and other organizations across Canada need funding to do critically important work.
In the context, there's an agreement made between Minister St-Ange and Hockey Canada. We don't have details on that agreement, so we're resting on Enoch Hutchinson's research that was not made public. We don't have the recommendations, and of course, the Cromwell report has some, solid recommendations, which I welcome. But I think perhaps only an independent public inquiry could shed light on how that organization is managed, and to ensure also follow-up of the safety of the athletes. Many of them, of course, develop through different hockey leagues that are not subject to the agreement that was signed. Could you perhaps expand on this? Should we have absolute trust? Minister St-Ange says, well, we're not signing a blank check to Hockey Canada. Would we be signing a blank check to Minister St-Ange if we don't react to this? In other words, we're trusting her or Hockey Canada or another organization stemming from that, because ultimately there is no public transparency. What's your opinion on this?
I believe that Madam Chair, the Cromwell report was exceptional and extraordinary in the in-depth work looking at the issues at Hockey Canada. The Cromwell report made 39 recommendations. So far, 6 of those have been acted on. The Cromwell report was the 3rd governance review since 2016, and he noted that there had been other reviews that the recommendations hadn't been adopted. So at some point, you can make recommendations, but if these aren't implemented, it seems a bit premature to go ahead and turn on the taps and turn on the funding, especially given Hockey Canada's prominence across Canada and how many children and youth are affected by its programs.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bain. I think, Sébastien, you have finished your time. Well, actually, no, you started a little bit late. I'll give you another 5 or 10 seconds. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. Well, that's much appreciated. Thank you. A last question then. In this context, the organizations responsible for the development of sports are often not-for-profit. They get that status of amateur sports organizations, but in many cases we see that they're many making a profit out of it. Is it your opinion that transparency is adequate? Is the legal status of those businesses the right one when we think of Hockey Canada in particular or Soccer Canada? Thank you.
Short reply, please.
The level of transparency in Canada is woefully inadequate, and we are so far behind other countries like the UK, Australia, and the US.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bain. And now we go to the New Democratic Party, Peter Julian. Peter, 6 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, and I too hope to benefit from your generous bonus in terms of extra seconds. Thank you to the witnesses for being in attendance.
The reason I gave the extra time was if Ms. Bain hadn't turned on her mic. So, there you go.
En tout cas, je vais continuer. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Commencer avec Madame Lafrenière, parce que vous avez parlé.
I'm going to begin with Ms. Lafrenière because you talked about the mental health crisis. And we know that young people are under tremendous pressure, not just the pandemic, but also the socioeconomic crisis, excessive pressure on young people. And young people, of course, are the very ones who participate in sports programming. What do you think the federal government should be doing to help the coaches across the country or the sports associations as well, so that we can truly meet the needs of these athletes who are experiencing mental health crises. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In fact, the reality is that those who were disadvantaged through lack of access to sports or to sports clubs, or who don't have access to resources for mental health, they're disadvantaged. And that is why we're trying to train our coaches with a better understanding of what mental health is, so they themselves can also begin their own self-reflection and then also interact with athletes across the country. As far as I'm concerned, the governmental priority, or the federal government in partnership with provinces and territories, must keep that discussion going throughout the country. We have the Red Deer Declaration, which is a very useful tool for us to use to do very good work across the country and to have an honest discussion about where the shortages are, what the problems are, and the fact that sports is costing more and more money.
I want to come back to the cost of sports in a moment, but I just wanted to come back to your response to a question from Mr. Waugh around the issue of screening of coaches. I mean, it's been decades since Sheldon Kennedy opened the door in speaking of the horrific treatment he had received. And at that time, we thought that sports organizations were going to respond. They were going to put in place, the federal government had talked about putting in place requirements. We found through the course of the hearings that we've had with Hockey Canada, with Canada Soccer, sports organizations haven't done this. Is it your opinion and the opinion of your organization that putting in place that very rigid screening so that we can't have abusive people falling through the cracks or passing from one type of coaching to another, which has creates more victims and undermines confidence for people in the sporting system?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. That's such a complex conversation, and I've seen great progress. And I see waves of improvement, and then you lose a person in the organization who believes in safe sport, and it goes for naught. It really is about how, through the Red Deer Declaration, we codify what safe sport means, and so that means what is the actions, what are the concrete steps that need to happen, and in screening, which is one step about prevention. It's one step in prevention. It should be understood across the country in its value and its limitations. It is a component of safety that's critical, just like getting the right equipment is critical. And so I implore parents, myself being a mother, to think differently about how they register their kids in sport. Have those conversations, lean in collectively, and screening has to be standardized because we need to understand that, and it's one step in the safe sport journey.
Thank you very much. I mean, the federal government has a key role to play, and I thank you for going deeper in your response to his question. This is very helpful. You mentioned the issue of the cost of sports, and we're seeing this increasingly across Canada, this segregation of wealthier families, poorer families, and poor families simply not being able to participate in sports, their kids not being given that opportunity because of the cost of sports. What are recommendations that you can give to us about that, so that in sports is, having been through the sports system myself, it is such a terrific benefit in so many ways. How can we make it more accessible, safer, of course, and more accessible to kids even from lower income families?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we need to partner better with organizations like Kids Sport, like Canadian Tire Jumpstart. Corporate Canada can play a very meaningful role in offsetting costs. I mean, I respect the priorities the very demanding priorities of governments across this country in maintaining our economy and the current crisis that we find ourselves in. But I do think governments have a role in setting and establishing the standard and commitment to affordable sport and to drive policy across the country in helping sport organizations to do that more effectively. So it's not an easy answer. And I think that national sport federations, we just talked about Hockey Canada, so need to do a better job of sharing the wealth to deliver sports,
Thank you very
dare I
much.
say, across sports.
Thank you, Ms. Lafreniere. Thank you, Peter. We're going to go to the second round now, but I don't think we can do a full second round, given that we have a very important business meeting to have, and it takes time to get in camera, etc. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just go to the first part of the second round. And I will begin with the Conservatives. I have no idea who will begin for the Conservatives, but for 5 minutes, please.
It's Mr. Shields.
Mr. Shields? Sure,
Yes,
go
thank
ahead,
you.
Mr. Shields, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate the witnesses here today. I have a piece here we look at organizations, and I think that's one of the recommendations. We'll look at whether the sports organizations have policies in place, have procedures. But I'm going to go to the parents on this one. So a provincial national organization in Canada, not naming it, has a really defined, so if you as a parent have a concern or parents have a concern about a coach, they go to this organization, they appoint a third party independent to review to see if it's worth to go ahead. Having done that, in this case that I know of, they did go ahead. They appoint a board person to do this. Then the coach finds out, and the coach contacts parents with emails that a parent takes it to the police. The coach is charged. Now that parent is in front of a commission to throw this concern out because they broke the confidentiality, even though the police have ruled this as criminal to be charged. Where do we protect the parents in this? The parents are being left out in this. When you say they need to take an active role, it is very difficult, and this is not the only case I've run across where the parents are at risk here, because most of the parents in this group have backed away from it. There's one parent left. The coach may be out of this one, go coach somewhere else. Your response to how do we solve it for the parents?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a complicated issue. I would suggest part of sport was built in the absence of sport being delivered in the school system. And I think it's still kind of in its infancy in safe sport policies and processes. And so, you drop your child off at school and you think the school system is there and it will protect your child. And we kind of apply that to the sports system, and it's not there. And so you're right, the parent can be very vulnerable, and the worry about retribution for their child or for themselves is absolutely a cause. And so that's why unity with parents, and I'm sad for this story, but that's why the unity is so important, and it's going to be bumpy. This is going to be a bumpy few years while this system is implemented and governments across the country grapple with safe sport.
Does that drive the cost up to make it unaffordable we do this? That's the other side of this. When you're putting bureaucracy, you're driving cost.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I understand absolutely what you're saying. I think we need to partner better with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, for instance. We try to partner with them. We partner with Kids Help Phone. We partner with military welfare, because that's the only way we can do our jobs. We haven't had an increase in funding in 10 years.
When you go back, look, in the outside communities when I grew up, the coaches alternated who umped the games. We had the community take care of that. We didn't have these issues because the volunteers, they did it themselves. We didn't have to have professional people doing it. We played all these outdoor sports outside of the school before. I did it. It was there before. We've lost that. Ms. Gaswitz, any opinion on what I've just asked?
Thank you so much. And I think, one of the pieces that you've identified is the role of the parents. And we did hear a lot of The parents have so much to learn and they play such a critical role. Your parents will decide if you're going forward, if you're participating and not. But one of the other things really speaks to education of the parents. And when we're talking about safe sport and what we're seeing in some of the processes is necessarily being able to recognize what actually is bullying, what is harassment, what is chirping, what are things that people need to be aware of. So I think to your point, including parents in the solution, it is a complex issue, but including parents in our education and saying, okay, we all need to learn, we all need to be aware of it is so important. So I think, thank you for raising the role of the parents, because as a parent as well, I agree. What don't we know? We want to learn more.
Thank you.
30 seconds.
One last question. Should Hockey Canada got $100 million, should they had their money reinstated federally? Ms. Gaswitz?
I'm not the one. That's a whole complex question that's dealing with a lot of pieces that I'm not aware of. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave that one to where it goes.
Ms. Frenier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's early days, and I think the minister's commitment to monitoring it is important. And as mentioned, if 6 of the recommendations are not are only done, I think it's the ongoing vigilance to make sure all of them are implemented.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the time is up, and I'm going to go to the second question, the group, which is the Liberals. Sorry, Lisa Hefner. Lisa, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I would like to reiterate the thanks to our witnesses for being here and sharing such important information and a really interesting conversation this morning. I think this whole conversation around safe sport has really been galvanizing across the country. I know in my riding in Hamilton, a couple of soccer athletes were speaking out about their hope now that they will achieve pay equity and gender equity in their sport. And what I'm hearing from them and what I heard from you, Ms. Lafreniere, is diversity is key to safe sport. Can you help us make that connection a little bit more clearly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of why diversity is important in safe sport?
Why is diversity key to safe sport? Why are those linked?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So historically, we've had all male coaches driving sport, and that has caused risk and cultural, I would suggest, cultural toxicity around having men driving sport across the board with no gender diversity of different thoughts, of different voices, of the diverse nature in Canada. We just had 1 million increase in population last year in immigration, and the bastion of white male coaches is no longer acceptable, quite honestly. And safety comes with diversity of thought for men, women, LGBTQIS+, for our Canadians, for people in Canada, for Indigenous peoples. It's needed.
Thank you. And continuing with you, Ms. Lafreniere, you mentioned also in your opening statement, we've spoken about it a little bit more, that a lot of parents can't afford sports for their kids. And we also heard today that a lot of sports organizations aren't transparent with their funding. Do you think there's a link there? Do you think if organizations were forced to be more transparent with their funding, they would be under a lot of pressure to make sports more affordable for kids?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think transparency is a cultural condition, and transparency across an organization is important as it relates to issues of complaints or abuse or harassment or financial wealth. And so I really take into heart listening to that need for transparency as an organization, as part of its culture and DNA.
Ms. Bayan, would you comment on that as well, whether transparency in sporting organizations might lead to greater equity among players?
I don't know about the equity, but Madam Chair, sorry. But transparency is cultural. It's an attitude. It's a belief. And on top of transparency is accountability. And exactly what we've seen, this toxic culture. We're not accountable to anybody. We're our own private club. What happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. This is unacceptable in 2023. And it's one small piece of it to actually be required, if you are a large sports organization, to be open with your books, to be open with your finances, rather than have that it's nobody else's business what we do attitude.
Thank you. And we've also been speaking at this committee about this idea of possibly a database where sporting organizations could share with one another if somebody among them was facing allegations or had to leave the organization because of allegations. What are your thoughts, I guess, first of all, Ms. Frenier, about the idea of a database? And do you think that that would capture all of the problems?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an element. If we want to look at quality sport delivery, we have to consider it in its entirety, but a database is a critical step. It would mean things like Serge Arsenault, who was a gymnastics coach in Montreal, when he had a safe sport complaint, wouldn't go and start up a new club in Edmonton and abuse again to be brought back. My goal would be for it to be established and for all provinces to partner and territories.
Ms. Gazowitz, do you have thoughts on that, the database, and whether it would solve the problem or do a lot to solve the problem of safe sport?
Very short answer, please.
I would agree with Lorraine that I believe it's an element, and I do think it would be a strong asset if we could be consistent and the sharing, and it opens up that facilitating and sharing of information. I think it would be a very constructive element and component of safe sport.
Thank you very much, Lisa. The time is up, and I'm going to go to Mr. Lemire, Monsieur Lemire, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question is for Ms. Gasowitz. In your testimony at the Status of Women Committee, you talked about funding, sustainable funding for sport. Now, I've learned that you signed an agreement with the BCS, and I'm wondering, how does that work? It's very important to have transparency and good governance when managing public funds. Now, what kind of information do you transmit to Sports Canada? What have you asked for has there been any analysis done? Did you have to pay for the services of this organization, the SCS? Could you explain to the committee the calculation formula to arrive at the amount of money you have to pay to the organization?
I'm sorry, I'm actually just not sure which organization we're referring to. Did you say BCS? Because I'm not sure what that is.
BCS.
Oh, sorry. Okay, to OSIC. Thank you. Yes, you're right. As a federally funded organization, we are all paying towards OSIC to make sure that, again, we're learning, we're accountable, we're all trying to move forward. I think this is that collective effort, all, again, embracing it to go forward and see how we can make sports safer. So yes, we are paying towards that. And I'm sorry, I think I got lost in what your second part of the question was.
As far as I'm concerned, how do the calculation sheets work? Let's say $5,000 is what you might have to pay to become member of OSIC, but how does it work exactly?
I can't speak to everybody's calculations because I'm not a part of OSIC. I can speak to ours on CIRC's side, in which case it was the base entry point was at $5,000. So it was the entry level was at $5,000. So that's what ours was assessed against.
I'm under the impression that with the minister's request for Hockey Canada, there was a formula, but it would never have provided the kind of information. Is there a fund within a fund within a fund, an equity fund? We would never have been able to shed light on what had unfolded at Hockey Canada in terms of the kind of documents required. Do you think we should be more careful about analyzing the data that is provided by organizations like Hockey Canada?
Very short answer, please.
So being a strong advocate of research, I always think that there's merit to being able to look at data and being able to evaluate and to apply those learnings so that we can continue to learn more.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I go to Peter Julian. Peter, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to go back to Ms. Ban about the issue of financial statements. We had Canada Soccer here before the committee, and the point that you made in your initial statement was bang on right. As we were speaking with Canada Soccer, we asked them about financial statements that they hadn't filed with Corporations Canada as the law requires. And subsequent to that, they did a week of filing going back 9 years to catch up on that. Is it your impression that there are many national sports organizations that are not following the basic issue of ensuring that their financial statements are accessible and that they are transparent? And my second question is related to the access of kids to programs. Cost of sports going up. Do you see a relationship between how we have the non-transparent, often, national sports organizations with a lot of money, and at the same time, kids from underprivileged families having more and more difficulty in accessing sports programs that can make such a difference in their lives?
Madam Chair, if I may take those backwards, I'm going to go with the second parts. Yes, the high cost of sports, one of the things, not that the financial statements tell you everything, one of the things the financial statements do tell you is how much hockey moms and dads have been gouged over the years with higher fees, and that's what allowed the surpluses and the reserves to build up. So maybe it was provisioning for future law settlements or whatever, but that's where the $32 million over the years was coming in, and another $10 million that was taken off Hockey Canada's books and put into its foundation. So you could definitely see that the moms and dads who were registering their kids were paying far more than the actual costs for the actual costs. So that's a good area for questioning. Financial transparency on the RCAAs. I would suspect most charities, most of them are small organizations under $1 million. So they probably wouldn't have complex audited financial statements, and they probably wouldn't say anything on that. But we just need more transparency. But that they have to have a T3010A. We have to know how many full-time staff, how much compensation. Right now, it's black.
Thank you very much. That ends our question and answer session. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ms. Bain. And now I want to just thank the witnesses for taking the time to answer some complex questions. I want to thank you again for coming and giving us your time. And I'm going to suspend the meeting because we have to go in camera. And I think all of you have your in-camera Zoom meeting. So shall we suspend now, Clerk? Thank you.
Merci, Alex.
you.